Hi, it's Coach Leah, and I'm here with my student Austin Reese. And we are here to talk a little bit today about para-jiu-jitsu, specifically about integrating a student into your jiu-jitsu gym that may have a spinal cord injury or was born with some spinal mobility issues, how to successfully integrate that student into the gym in a way that they feel challenged, but it's still safe, and the other students kind of understand how to train with that person. So, first thing, we're going to talk about what level is that person's paralysis. So, Austin's going to speak a little bit to that.
So there are different levels. Typically, I think in para-jiu-jitsu, you're going to have anybody from probably about a T2 to 3 and lower, and you have what are called complete and incomplete injuries. A complete injury, somebody wouldn't be able to move anything below that level of injury. So if it's a T2, you're looking probably from right about here all the way down to legs. They wouldn't be, it wouldn't be functional. So their legs are going to be fairly atrophied, which they could move quite a bit different. And then an incomplete injury, somebody's going to have some movement below their level of injury. So their legs and body is going to work a bit different. I'm L2 incomplete spinal cord injury, so I still have some movement, not enough to be able to walk or anything, and not really utilize my legs in jiu-jitsu, but yeah, just a different way to move.
Mm-hmm. So Austin's legs are, full size. He has all the muscles still there, so it's a little harder for him to move himself if he gets, flipped one way or another. But if he gets on top, or if we're starting seated, his base is a little better than some of the athletes that I've worked with that have that complete paralysis. They have lighter legs, they have the atrophy in their legs, and they can almost kind of tumble and invert, and their legs really stay with them a little more when they move, rather than getting, the possibility of getting twisted one way or the other. So advantages to both, disadvantages to both. It's just a little different, but it's a good thing to know about your athlete as they come in. It'll change kind of how they move. We went to a para-jiu-jitsu clinic recently down in Colorado, and Rustin Hughes and Ryan Wallace were running it. They were teaching, so it was mostly amputees, and it was really interesting. It was very cool. There was another student that had a spinal cord injury, so Austin was able to get some great training in, and it was just good talking to other people in the community. One of the things that Ryan had said was, this is just another body type, and this is just a different way of adapting jiu-jitsu for that body type. And we're doing that all the time as coaches. We have all different ages, sizes of people now that are doing jiu-jitsu, levels of mobility, and you change things a lot. People come in with injuries, so this is just kind of a more extreme version of that. So I think if you're a high-level coach, it's very possible. It's a good challenge, and the community of para-jiu-jitsu athletes is really growing. It's already very big in Brazil, and I think it's going to continue to grow in the US. So I think it's just something to educate yourself on, and if someone comes into the gym that wants to train, then you have an idea of what to do and where to start. So we want to kind of give a blueprint for that. We've been training for about a year and a half now, and just what we've learned, we've talked to some other para-jiu-jitsu athletes, we've watched videos, there's just a lot of trial and error, because everyone's going to move differently, very differently, depending on where their injury is, their own mobility. And so a lot of it's going to be very specific to the athlete you're working with, but we're going to try to give just a general overall blueprint that would be kind of a foundation for someone to start with. So we started with adaptive training, meaning I was not using my legs. They're also called deficit rolls in the para-jiu-jitsu world, where if you have an athlete that's blind, you would have someone who could see blindfold themselves and they would do a match. So basically we started and I would just try my very best not to use my legs. There's a bit of base, like I'm going to be using my legs for base without thinking about it. I found that Austin was able to attach to me and use me for base, which is something he does with objects around him. And so it made him harder to kind of take over to the ground too. But starting with those adaptive rolls, it's safer and it's just fun too. It was fun for me. It was a challenge. So we started with seated grappling and just wrestling positions and basic submissions from there. So that'll be kind of the first video in our series. And I started him on top where he was going to spend time on the bottom. Everyone does who's new, but obviously if you're integrating into a general open mat, you end up down there a lot anyway. And, in mount bottom, back control. So I started him with side control top and, north, south, sit out position where he was on top and like what submissions are possible from there. So he has a top game. And if he's doing an adaptive match, there's a good chance you're going to end up on top if you're aggressive with your moving takedown. And you got to know what to do. I think when a para-jiu-jitsu athlete starts in a general open mat and everyone's using their legs, you develop a top game, or a bottom game, but not the top game. So I think there's an advantage to that, and I do think it's a safer way to start, and it's more fun. I think you feel more successful. You feel kind of more in control. So I think it's just a better start if you can. If you have a coach that'll do that or a training partner that'll do that, I think that's a good way to start. So then eventually after about a year, and we were training about once a week, he was starting to integrate with seated matches into a smaller open mat at our space here. We're like, okay, at some point I wanted him, and he wanted to be able to go to a general class. And so we moved into that slowly, but we started with upper level partners, so purple belt and above, and started with seated rolls. And eventually we started in our lessons just going over how are we going to deal with someone who's standing, we're started seated, and that person's going to be standing and trying to tip you over past your guard, and like what do we need to watch out for there. And do you want to talk a little bit about your experience kind of moving from our adaptive roll seated to a standing opponent and just that general open mat?
Yeah, I think overall I was very lucky and with Coach Leah and the training partners I had initially to start in a smaller controlled space with higher level belts. That made me very comfortable before I moved to a general open mat. Once I did move to the general open mat, I had to be, Coach Lee and I talked quite a bit about choosing of partners, how to, just the verbiage to talk about how to keep myself safe and everything else. Because eventually I knew that we weren't gonna be doing adaptive rounds all the time. They'd be normal rounds, and the difference would be that I'd be doing an adaptive match, but the other person would be using their legs. And some of the big highlights that we had to hit that we found out over time, I think were, no sprawling, to have that conversation to say to the training partner, hey, please don't sprawl on me if we're moving around, as well as, be careful when you're breaking my posture. Don't try and snap me down pretty violently either. And I think the biggest lesson I learned was just tapping early and tapping often. Anytime I felt unsafe or that I could potentially get hurt or even just tweak my back or my wrist or arms or anything like that, I'd just tap and reset and go from there.
That's a good rule for any student, but if you're a para-jiu-jitsu athlete, is particularly with paralysis, now we're going home and maybe can't get around, can't drive, can't take care of family. It's just a bigger impact on your life if you get an upper body injury. So we're really a little more cautious about that. And there have to be some rules with someone standing. If someone drops their weight on him, it could further injure his spine. Like he has metal in his back. And so just having like a short conversation, like, please don't sprawl on me, don't hang on the head. If you have metal elsewhere or, fused vertebrae elsewhere, just letting your partners know, like, hey, if you're going to guillotine or darce, like, just make sure you give me time to tap, go slow. And just advocating for yourself, tapping partway through a roll if it doesn't feel safe, doing seated rounds with people who are newer, talking to black belts at some schools. You shouldn't ask a black belt to roll. It's just an etiquette rule, but that might be your best partner. So maybe having a conversation before open mat, professor or coach, is it okay if I ask you to roll because you're going to be one of my safer partners on the mat? Another thing you can do, and I tell my students that are dropping in as well, to watch a round of open mat, sit on the side and watch around, and you'll see who's going really hard, and they might be competing, or maybe they are just brand new and that's all they have, or their attributes, they don't have a lot of skill yet. You don't need to roll with those people. They may not be able to hold that back or think about what's happening to you while they're training, and they'll get better, but you don't need to sacrifice your body to help them do that, especially as a para-jiu-jitsu athlete. So just let that person get a little better first before you roll with them. And at some point, you probably will be able to roll with most people and have a strategy for that. We talked about, he did have a few people finally sprawl on him, and despite the conversation, just didn't understand or felt threatened, like he was going to ankle pick them or something. And so he, had weight dropped on him. And so we developed some strategies for that, and we can put those in videos, but essentially just getting to the mat. So we're not in that position of, loading the spine where we're going to go home and not be able to function as well. So picking partners, upper belts, you can do seated mats or drill a position, drill back control, drill mount bottom, where we're already attached and there's just a limited amount of things that person's going to be able to do. They're not going to be able to be unattached and drop their weight on you or grab the head because we're already on the mat. So those are safer positions to just drill to start with. If you're in a position where maybe people aren't going to do deficit rolls, or you feel a little more pressure to jump into a general open mat first, I would recommend the deficit or the adaptive rolls first. But if you can't, a lot of the people I've talked to, they just jumped right into a general class and the coach didn't know how to modify or wasn't willing to. I think that's very possible if you have a beginner class and you have a para-jiu-jitsu athlete. You have to think about it a little bit, but what are you going to have that person do that day? And he usually, if we're doing in our general classes a guard week of some kind, he'll skip that class and do open mat and just get those good rolls in. And then sometimes we can, if it's a top or bottom position, then we don't really have to modify that much. It's, we're not escaping, but we're attacking and controlling posture from that bottom position. So it's just, again, a different strategy, but you'd be surprised how many submissions are possible from the bottom. We don't think about it that way most of the time, but the hierarchy of your priorities just become different. And he's catching people now, upper belts. He'll catch me, especially if I'm not using my legs and I can't move too much. If we're just arms to arms, like he has more ride time there than me, and he's starting to catch me. Wrist locks, arm locks, chokes, things like that. So you start having some back and forth with people, which is fun. I think that's everything we want to talk about. Is there anything you want to add to that?
I think probably the biggest thing is just to have fun and protect yourself so that you can come back, the next day or the following week to continue your practice.
Yeah. And there's no medals for open mat, despite what some people may think. I think especially if you don't compete, you tend to see your own teammates as competitors rather than training partners. And that's where roles tend to escalate. So, for those people who like to go harder, get out there and find those other people at a tournament. And then otherwise, just kind of adapt to the person in front of you. I hope that this is helpful for some coaches and athletes that are hoping to jump into jiu-jitsu. Most of jiu-jitsu is on the ground anyway. Half the time people sit to start batches, even in a general open bat. So I think it's a great sport for people who have spinal cord, mobility issues. It's very possible. And we've been having a ton of fun figuring this stuff out. So hopefully you can get something from it, and maybe it'll convince some people that they can get on the mat. I'll post some other resources below. There's some other para jiu-jitsu athletes that have been doing this longer and have some great ideas about how things can work and techniques that work for them. So I'll put that out there and hope to see you on the mat sometime. Boom.
We're done.